With all that said, are you guys ready for the fifth story of the evening?
All right, our final storyteller is Dese'Rae Stage. She is a photographer, writer, and suicide awareness advocate. Please welcome Dese'Rae.
Can you hear me? I can't see any of you, so I don't know if I feel better or worse about that. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2004 when I was 21 years old. I'm gonna get my notes out already. God. Prior to that, I had been misdiagnosed with depression years before and fed a steady stream of antidepressants, which did nothing more than kill my sex drive and make me more depressed than I was when I started out. And I had been cutting myself for 10 years. I moved to Tennessee for my first real passionate love. It was a whirlwind romance, you know, one of those, but it was also really volatile. And the thing about it was that we followed the textbook progression of domestic abuse. First, there were the threats, and then she was pushing me, and then she was hitting me, but it was always in places where the marks wouldn't be visible to anyone else. And then it didn't matter anymore. And I would give ultimatum after ultimatum, but I never followed through in leaving anyway. So one night in late 2005, it got so bad that I went out and bought a bottle of vodka with the intention of drinking myself into oblivion and driving off of whatever bridge I could find. The only thing that saved me that night was that she came home before I expected her to. And after that, the fights lessened for a while. I was keeping myself busy. I was about to graduate with my degree in psychology. I had a full course load, and I was applying to PhD programs, and I was waiting tables 30 hours a week. But my illness was getting worse. I had really bad health insurance and bad reactions to medication, and I had no way to manage my symptoms on my own. It was a new illness for me. So then the fights started getting bad again, and what happened was at this time I started hitting back. And even though it was in self-defense, I felt like the scum of the earth. So when I found out that she was cheating on me, I lost my goddamn mind. I'm glad that made you guys laugh. I realized that we were at this critical juncture. I knew that I couldn't live with her, but I didn't think that I could live without her either. And we'd break up and get back together in this maddening cycle. I'd come home from work and I'd sit on our porch. We were in Tennessee, remember? The porch is there. I would sit on our porch and listen to the trains run behind our house. And I would write in my journal, "I don't know how to do this," over and over in block letters, page after page. Because my mind was hurting and my heart was hurting and everything felt impossible. And I just didn't know what to do. So I guess it was really no surprise when I did finally try to kill myself. She didn't come home that night, even though I begged her to, but she did call the cops. And I remember them banging on my door because it sounded like gunshots and then barging into my apartment. And I was so hysterical that I couldn't even tell them my name. But I had the wherewithal to call my mom, and she gave them all of my information. And when they put her back on the phone with me, she said to go willingly, to get myself out of the hospital as quickly as I possibly could, and to lie if I had to. And she reminded me that given my intended profession, if there were any mental illness issues on my record, that, you know, I could ruin my chances of getting a job. So I went willingly, and I remember the ambulance ride because it was so quiet, and then my next memory is of lying in the hospital bed and telling this nurse, who did not give one shit, how terrified I was of needles. I didn't have all these tattoos then either, so I don't want to hear it. So I tell her I'm terrified of needles, and she just completely disregards this, and she gives me a tetanus shot. And she starts taking my blood, and I'm laying down, so as she fills the vials with my blood, she lays them on my stomach one by one. That's one of my most traumatic memories, thank you. And it just seemed like the cruelest thing that anyone could do, you know? So after that, I lied my way through my psych eval. I insisted that I was not suicidal and that I was just having a bad night, and I was free, just like that. But before I left the hospital that night, I promised myself one thing, and it was that I was going to find a way to stop hurting myself. So, in school, I was always interested in psychology because I wanted to understand what makes people want to die and how to prevent that. And I've told you I had issues with depression and self-injury for years before that, but I also lost a friend to suicide. And so even before it became this shame-filled memory for me, it was something that I cared deeply about. And I remember when I was an undergraduate, I'd go and I would bring this up to faculty members, and they would always say, like, no, you can't study suicide, you're an undergrad. Wait till grad school. And so the thing is that I didn't just talk to 2 or 3 professors. I fell in love a lot, and so I moved a lot, and by the time I graduated, I had actually 5 undergraduate institutions under my belt. So, you know, I heard the word no a lot. And that was until I got to East Tennessee State and I met Dr. Dula. He ran the applied psychology lab, and he had this long hair that like flowed down to his back, but he wore a tie to work every day, which was weird to me, I don't know. And you could tell that he was different. He was a musician too, and he told us this story one day about how he had been in construction for years and years before he decided to further pursue his education. So you could see this real-world experience in his approach to academia. Anyone who wanted to work in his lab could, as long as they were motivated enough and they could do research on any topic. So he wasn't uptight and he wasn't afraid of suicide. And my experience in his lab shored me up. It made me think that maybe I could do the kind of work that I really wanted to do. So I ended up getting into a PhD program back home in Miami. And I'm forgetting things. I got into the PhD program, and I remembered, or I knew exactly who I wanted my advisor to be right off the bat. And I remember going down the hallway and how nervous I was on my way to my first meeting with him. And the moment I brought it up, he was like, no, you need to work with some of my archival data on risky behaviors in adolescence. And I was like, fuck, come on. That's not actually what I said. Anyway, so I knew that it wasn't gonna work. The nature of bipolar disorder is that you go back and forth in these cycles of depression and mania, and you can't get out of bed for days or weeks or months, and then suddenly you can fly. You're invincible, you talk too fast, you never sleep, and you're no stranger to drunken one-night stands. The thing about that is that after my suicide attempt, I decided that I was going to forego medication, which left me vulnerable to the whims of my broken brain. So there was the depression. I didn't like Miami. I didn't want to be there, even though I knew my family was there. I was having trouble making new friends. The lack of support in my program was crushing to me, and I was still dealing with this breakup. And then, you know, the last nail in the coffin was that I lost one of my best friends to suicide. And then you have the mania, and one of the symptoms of a bipolar mania is this reckless spending. So I had all of this loan money in my bank account just sitting there, and I was like, yes! So I bought, you know, a laptop and an iPod, and I bought a camera. And then I went to every city in the United States that I wanted to see. was fun. And while this was happening, I fell in love with two things. One of them was New York City, and the other one was this fucking camera. So I took it everywhere with me. I had no idea what I was doing, by the way. Another symptom of bipolar disorder is that you're willing to take risks without considering the consequences. And so by that spring, I decided that I was done with this program, and that I was quitting, and that I was moving to New York City. I don't know. So it just seemed to me that the thing that I had been doing wasn't working, and I had no plan past that. Like, I just didn't care. So I left. I packed up my car and I drove up here. And a couple of months after I got here, I went to a Tori Amos concert. Go. Everyone laughs at that. I don't know why. I'm not like cutting myself and crying right now. I mean, come on. So I went to this Tori Amos show, and I made a friend there who worked at a record label, and she subsequently got me a job at this record label. And I became more obsessed with music than I had been prior, which was pretty obsessed. What was I thinking? Oh, so I started going to shows several nights a week, and every time I would go to a show, I would take my camera. And that's how I learned photography, was by shooting musicians, because you constantly have a subject that's moving, constantly. And then the lighting is changing every few seconds. And so you learn really quickly. I did that for about 3 years before I realized that it wasn't fulfilling to me, and why. And I had photographed and met most of my heroes, and I had cool kid cred, but I wanted to be doing something good, something that would change the world in some small way. And I had been raised on this idea that if you just put your mind to it, you can do anything. And New York was proving that this was actually possible. So I used my camera, or set out to use my camera, to achieve what I couldn't achieve through science. I started to do some research. I Googled suicide survivor. And what I found was people who had lost others, loved ones, to suicide. Not people like me, who had tried to die but lived, and who were confused about what happened next, and who felt shame, and who felt misunderstood, and who mostly felt really alone. I noticed that there were no resources for attempt survivors out there. There was nothing. Anytime you did see something from an attempt survivor, it was anonymity. It was completely anonymous because of a fear of stigma and shame. And even worse was that the professionals thought that we were dangerous. They didn't want us talking to one another because they thought that all we cared about was the right knot for a noose, or like how you're supposed to go down the road and not across the tracks. So I decided that that was where I was going to focus my efforts, and I hit on my approach. I decided that I would interview attempt survivors, and just as they were finished, I would make a portrait of them while they were still in this mindset, and while they were still having these memories. I wanted to show what we look like and how we feel to people who didn't understand, and I also wanted to show other attempt survivors that we're not alone, that we're here, and that we shouldn't be ashamed, and that if we speak out, we can maybe show other people that mental illness is the same as physical illness, and that just because it's in your brain doesn't mean it's worth invalidating. I don't know if you know this, but we have really weird ideas about mental health in this country. And they're often not based in truth. So I think a lot of us don't really know what it feels like to have a suicidal depression, and we don't know what turns life can take to get us there. And we don't know how to talk about it because it's scary to be under all of these lights and not being able to see you. So I still didn't know how to find the attempt survivors. I started to post Craigslist ads, because Craigslist is very active in New York. And most of the time the ads would get flagged and taken down, but sometimes, what's happening? But sometimes when they didn't get taken down, I would find an attempt survivor who wanted to share their story. And I collected these for a while, and then I built a website, and I started posting a story and a portrait every week. And I called this project Live Through This. Where am I? So I collected these for a while, and then I realized that I wanted to travel to collect more stories because New Yorkers are weird creatures, and we are not representative of the entire population of the country, even the suicidal ones. So last year I launched this Kickstarter campaign, and it was wildly successful. The Associated Press covered it, and I was on BBC Radio, but more importantly, more interestingly, was what was happening in my inbox during this time. I started to get emails from other attempt survivors all over the world who wanted to share their stories, so there have been no more Craigslist ads. And I also started to get emails from people who had lost loved ones who said to me, like, I wish that they had seen your website. I feel like maybe it would have given them hope to live just one more day. So now I've collected so many different stories from so many different kinds of people, from tech developers to musicians to people who live on mental health disability. Stories that run the gamut from multiple personality disorder to postpartum depression to sexual abuse to people who had completely normal childhoods and don't know why they're suicidal, or were. So back in the beginning, I interviewed a friend of a friend. She grew up in Miami, about a mile away from me. We went to the same elementary school and even had some of the same teachers at different times. And I'm listening to her story, but backing up, we didn't know each other until we got here. So I'm listening to her story, and I was just struck by the similarities. And I rode the train home that day, and I just sobbed, because I knew exactly what that pain felt like. And the people that I was interviewing always knew that I was an attempt survivor, but I never gave them any details. I never told my story because I felt like it would muddy the project somehow, like that would make it less impactful. But I'm realizing that that's exactly the point. That someone somewhere is gonna find these stories, and they'll find just one that parallels their own, and that'll give them strength. And maybe that'll give them the strength to come out of the shame closet and tell their story to someone else. Or maybe they just won't be so scared to reach out to a friend in need. Maybe it won't be so terrifying to just talk about it if you need to. I've interviewed 66 attempt survivors at this point, and they're all people just like you and me. And I'm seeing that the louder I yell, and the more people I convince to yell with me, the closer we inch toward breaking down these walls of stigma and shame, and the easier it becomes to just live through this. Thank you.
Dese'Rae L stage, everyone.